Welcome to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. We feature top entrepreneurs and thought leaders from around the world, those who bring a global mindset and a unique perspective to their life and business. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hi, David Nilssen here. I'm the host of this podcast. I'm really glad that you're listening in. You know, the goal of this show is to connect with thought leaders who have what I like to refer to as a borderless mindset. And here we discuss new ideas, innovations, best practices, trying to share insights that can help people like you, entrepreneurs, to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Now, this episode is brought to you by Doxa Talent. Doxa helps businesses to source full-time, highly skilled workers from all over the world. And as a result, these companies can scale faster, increase margin, and improve culture. And they provide everything from accountants, sales development reps, virtual assistants, even software engineers to publicly traded companies and local small businesses. If you want to learn more about how to grow your business with offshore professionals, simply visit doxatalent.com. All right, I am excited for today's show because we have a fantastic guest, someone who has really rich experience as an entrepreneur, but also deep domain expertise in the IT managed services and SaaS industries. Jamison West has been an entrepreneur for 25 years, and he started companies in both of those industry verticals. Again, that's the IT MSP, managed service provider space, and then SaaS companies. He built a company called Arterian, which he grew from one person to 40 through both organic growth and acquiring 4 different organizations. He co-founded 3 SaaS companies, including Teamatics, SmileBack, and TimeZest. And he currently serves as a fractional CEO for SmileBack and the chairman of TimeZest. He enjoys a role as a strategic coach and consultant for several companies in the US, primarily again in that a technology space. And then and that work, I should say, is a benefits from the work that he did previously as an EOS implementer. And finally, I'll just note that he wrote a book, a great book called The Emotional Side of Selling a Small Business, which last night was rated 4.6 out of 5 on Amazon. So Jamison, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Well, I want to just maybe start to give people a little bit of background about who you are. I actually first met you years ago when you were running Arterian, which is an IT managed service provider business. Do you mind just sharing a little bit for those that are listening that might not actually know what that is? What is an MSP, and then why does it even exist?
Yeah. So I'll give you even a little bit of background history to that. I was born a serial entrepreneur, and I realized after my stint at the business school at the University of Washington that I was going to be a really poor employee, didn't know what I wanted to go do. But while I'm not a trained engineer, I'm a trained business person, an entrepreneur. I realized that I'm a geek and I love technology and I was super passionate about it. So right in 1995, clearly I was like 4 years old. I started just helping people I knew who were also entrepreneurs, with their technology. I didn't know a lot, but I knew more than they did. And eventually just found a lot of passion saying, wow, I can build my own thing. So what ended up happening is there was a life cycle, and, businesses and verticals go through life cycles. The IT services space back then predominantly was you pay by the hour, they come in, it was very reactive. It was very difficult. It was kind of you hunt, and if you're not hunting, you're losing. And it was tricky. Ultimately, some maturity came to that where a managed service provider began implementing standards and tools and going to recurring fees. We were very early in that. By the early 2000s, we were really rolling our clients into a fixed fee, more proactive approach, more consultative, and a reliable set of revenue, so that we could, predict margins, predict cost of goods, and ultimately drive success in the business. So we do it's outsourced help desk, IT management. It's all that kind of stuff is what we did at Arterian.
Everything from hardware to email to software to security, right? I mean, it's
all of it. It's, and people, you have a company of 50 folks and nobody knows, they just need the stuff to work. And then ultimately the more mature providers could also come in there and help the rest of the team say, well, what are the technologies you need to move the strategic endeavors of the business forward? And that kind of like CIO mindset to come in execute on those as projects, and then manage them on the back end so the company could do what they do best, right?
Yeah. It was funny. I know this about you because as we were reading the bio there, it's clear that you've since exited that business, but while you were building it, you acquired 4 different companies. I'm always fascinated by that because most people, they start a business, they operate it, and then they sell it, right? But you actually grew yours through acquisition, which is not common. I'm just curious, like, how did you find those companies? And then ultimately, how did you convince them or, decide to sort of merge those two together?
Yeah. It's great. What happened is I kind of got to a size that is a very typical, where I had about 10 employees, and it was kind of a glass ceiling that I was struggling to break through because it's like E-Myth, Michael Gerber E-Myth, kind of magical. You hit this thing where every person underneath you pretty much is billable. You're making some profits. It's a really obvious plateau. I can manage 8 to 9 people. I'm running the whole show. I'm kind of doing every executive function. I'm the only leader, and everybody's billable, and it's like a nice place to be. It is very hard to go then to 18 people because now you've got an expensive non-billable. Anyway, what I realized is I was struggling, even though I was more business mindset than engineering mindset, as most MSP owners are engineering mindset. I was struggling to break through that glass ceiling. And I read an article from a company that basically said, if you're at this revenue, this I did it, and you're struggling, it just was me. They nailed me. And I was like, then maybe acquisition's the way to go. Fortunately, I'd been talking with a friend who had a slightly smaller company. He was tired of running it and ready to change. 3 weeks after reading that article, I acquired his business. And within the next 24 months, acquired 3 more. So that was all in a 2-year time span. And we went from 10 staff to 40 staff. And so it was an aggressive model to break the glass ceiling. We used seller-based financing to be able to afford the acquisitions. And we just structured in a way that was accretive to everybody without me having to give up equity. So it was a nice move.
Yeah, very cool. And that, like, tell me a little bit about what that's like then to, 3 weeks later, you've now inherited somebody's team, somebody's customers, their process. You're now trying to blend systems. Like how hard was integrating those?
So, oh boy. So I wrote the book on it. No, I could talk for hours on, so due diligence, there's only so much you can learn about a company before you acquire it. And there's 2 things that everybody has their strengths and weaknesses in an organization. My genius zone kind of goes towards 2 things: people and finance, not operations, not sales and marketing. I can do all of them. I've had to as an entrepreneur, but people in finance, right? Leaders in finance. I could do all the due diligence I wanted about contracts and finance and numbers and legal and all the standard stuff that most people talk about. It is excruciatingly difficult to do diligence on culture when the seller doesn't want to tell their employees they're trying to sell the company, right? So I can't walk in and interview all of his employees. So I would say that the tactical and financial integration were exactly as expected. But I didn't know their people and their clients very well. And those were the challenges that we ran into predominantly over all 4 of those acquisitions. It was just very, very difficult. Ultimately, I have a whole story I could talk about, but ultimately I ended up after those 2 years with 5 different cultures under one roof. Mine plus the 4 I acquired. And we had that created some very acute issues that we had to correct. And it was not easy. Yeah.
I actually really appreciate that. I think, most of the time people get on any sort of podcast show, they're promoting sort of what they've done or who they are. And it's pretty easy to talk about the glamorous side of entrepreneurship, right? We like to celebrate those big successes, but there are, I've never seen a straight path to success. No. So, you say 5 cultures, like at that point, what did you do? Like, how did you think about trying to meld those together, or were you capable?
Absolutely. So, yeah, and this bleeds directly into where one of the main things that we now coach at our coaching firm at ConnectStrat is what we call the culture guide. And it's, while we agree with, and I'm a big Lencioni fanboy, so I love the core value, but I said people is my thing, right? And I view core values, if somebody has a handful, 3 or 4 of them, as kind of ideas or concepts. And it's great, but it's really, really easy to pay lip service to them. And it's also very easy for two different managers or two different leaders to have different ideas. So let's take a really bland one that Lencioni beat me up on in person. That was one of my Arterian core values. It's called integrity. And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" Like, he literally beat me up on it. And I was like, okay. We kind of laughed about it. And I was like, okay, I get it. I can have, as a manager, a conversation with one of my people that says, "I don't think this showed integrity." And we can have a 30-minute argument over what integrity means, because he grew up differently than I did. Right. And ideas do not create structure and expectations within an organization. So the culture guide breaks down, like, what are the 20 or 30 specific behaviors we expect in our culture? And that is what I coach. Like, let's build a culture guide. So long answer to your question, but we created a culture guide when we saw this problem. And I had a 1-hour meeting with all these 40 people in the room. And it was intense. I probably shed a couple of tears because I was very emotionally invested in what was happening, and we were getting our butts handed to us. And the next day, a few people didn't show up to work. And I was like, uh-oh, what did I just do? Until several people walked into my office, great people, who said, "I was about to leave. You just did the right thing at the right time. And the people who aren't here today are the people that you should have let go a long time ago." And I realized then a great little quote that hit me smack in the face. When you're sitting at the top of a tree full of monkeys looking down, you see smiling faces. But when you're at the bottom of the tree looking up, you have a completely different point of view. And that it was like, I had this moment where I was like, wow, I was a little out of touch. I've been growing really fast through acquisition, and those cultural problems were happening. And that specific expectation changed our world.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's funny. There's a book I read a long time ago, Principles by Ray Dalio, and it's effectively the same thing. It's, what are the behaviors that bring those things to life? Because we could say, I know people that rate their team members based on values, and I'm not saying that's good or bad, but if I can argue with you whether that is an objective rating or not, then it's not meeting the market. So you got to come up with what are those sort of downstream behaviors that can bring that to life. So I love that. Tell me about the sale process. There's a lot of MSPs in the US. Obviously, you were successful enough to exit yours. What do you think it was about the business that made it, attractive to another buyer? And tell me about that sort of sales process in general.
So, and this was interesting. I was probably I had more acumen than most because I just acquired 4, and I was selling the same kind of company. So I was fairly well prepared. At least I think I was, until it was all done. And then there was a whole bunch of stuff I wasn't prepared for, which is why I wrote a book. So because on the buyer side, you're less emotionally invested in what's happening. It's a business transaction. When you're on the seller side, it's a whole lot more than that.
Yeah.
Right. So I'd spent 21 years of my life raising this baby, and I use that metaphor with great intention, because selling your baby is it's nuts, right? So I wasn't ready for that part of it. The process, the reason we were valuable is we were focused on Microsoft Cloud services. I'd won awards. Fortunately, being in Seattle, I was in Microsoft's backyard and got to connect with them a lot. I've since moved, but it was nice being right there by Redmond, so I could really be in the ears of people. I knew how to create vendor relationships, and we were writing the right coattails, right? So we created some value there through our acumen. We had some great clients. We had some really good people. We struggled through those acquisitions. My last acquisition almost crippled the company. So we'd had to spend a couple of years regaining EBITDA to create a multiple that was attractive, and in showing how we could do that consistently. So from that perspective, finding people who were interested wasn't difficult. I'm pretty well known in the industry. It's how you asked me earlier how I found my buyers. I literally am on stage speaking a fair amount, and I said, hey, if anybody's interested, I'm buying. And I had a line of people who are interested. Now selling was almost the same. That I didn't want to announce to the world I was selling. But I knew a couple bugs I could put in a couple folks here to say, this is, I'm starting to contemplate this, and for the right number, I'd have a conversation. And they came quickly when I said that. I had 4 or 5 suitors immediately. but then a whole bunch of emotions got in the way. Then it got hard because my people are affected, my family's affected. I don't know what I'm going to do next is affected. The number changes from the initial really glorious conversation to digging in, and all it gets lower and lower. And I realized that process was excruciating for me, and I felt pretty beat up by the end of it. And it ultimately was the best thing I've done. It wasn't an end-all number for me by any stretch of the imagination. I have more to do, but it was enough for me to move to the next phase of my entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So is that what led you to write the book then? I mean, the emotional side of selling is very clear, right?
Well, absolutely. And the book is a fable. It's fictional, but there's some loose pieces that are certainly built around partially. I mean, there are similarities. It's definitely borrowing from my experience. But then the last third of the book is a handful of case studies from people I know who've been through the same. And I also borrowed from those. So those case studies are factual, and I borrowed elements of their case studies and leveraged those to build the fable. So it's, I think any business owner who's thinking about or has gone through that, like, okay, I'm going to sell, and it's not a $100 million sale. It's like, this is going to be nice. I built the business, I'm done. But I also am like, I'm affecting people. It's maybe not there. It's how most entrepreneurs have to think about an exit. I think it's powerful in that regard.
Yeah. I always chuckle when I hear the term business is not personal. And I always think to myself, it is if you're the entrepreneur, right? Like it's just your identity, your life, your family, everything is so closely connected to that. And so I can see why when somebody steps out, I did that when I stepped out of my first business. There is a crisis at some point where you're like, who am I? Like, even if it went well, I still don't know what's next. Right?
It can come from of a multitude of areas. It can come from a relationship and time perspective. It can come from money. It can come from identity. It can come from guilt over what might happen to the people who work for you. I mean, there's so many pieces that play into that.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're obviously someone who spends a lot of time coaching others. You were the CEO of SmileBack and the chairman of TimeZest. I know you put a lot of heart and energy into some peer-to-peer learning organizations and so on and so forth. Like, how do you find time for all of this?
So I actually sold SmileBack. I'm no longer the CEO. I should update that in my bio. So I did sell SmileBack to ConnectWise as a larger company in the IT services space, which was nice. So my two principal endeavors right now are, co-founder of TimeZest. We're a software company that does scheduling for the IT services space, and then ConnectStrat coaching for IT services companies principally, but we also work aligned at anybody in the technology space. We do a lot of work in that regard. My time, it is tricky to find time for all that, but really what I ended up doing is one of our co-founders at TimeZest has just really been great at growing the recurring revenue of the SaaS business. So he's full-time my technical co-founder, and then he's my CEO or full-time in the business. I treat TimeZest not unlike I would one of my ConnectStrat coaching clients. Really, I'm there to blend in from a finance and people and strategy perspective for maybe 20% of my time. And the rest of my time goes into the coaching company. I'm the principal founder. I have two co-founders. And so I kind of drive a lot of the business, leverage some staff that we have to really make it run well. And then we have other coaches that are on the team. I spend maybe another day a week running it, and 3 days a week with my own clients coaching. Because the way I stay fresh and good at what I do, and honestly, my passion is helping others with all that. I've gone through a lot and I've learned a lot. And if I can pass it on and give people a nugget here and there to make their journey better, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's cool. I mean, I said this at the very beginning. You've got both the breadth and the depth experience. So I can see why coaching is a great place for you to be. I am curious though, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, there's a lot of coaches out there. I feel like today everyone's become an EOS implementer or a scaling up coach. And those are great. I mean, I think there's a big need for those. I am curious though, Like, how do you differentiate in a sea of coaches?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think first of all, the pool of prospects or people who need this kind of stuff is
Fast.
immense, right? The number of businesses out there is for every 5 businesses I talk to, there's maybe one where I'm like, yeah, maybe you don't need that, or you have a good coach, and the other 4 are like, as soon as they have the budget and the mentality, they probably need to get on this band, right? I mean, there's a lot of need out there. One thing I would say is I really, and we embrace this deeply at ConnectStrat. There are architects and builders. It's our little metaphor, right? So architects and builders are the architects. Lencioni, who I already talked about, Simon Sinek, Carnegie, Jim Collins. I can go on and on. They literally wrote the book on what vision and strategy and people and this is not. There's some incredible concepts by some incredible thinkers, and I think of them as the architects. And the problem is it has to be simplified and boiled down. I'm an entrepreneur. I run a small business. I got $1 million. I can't read 100 books and then pull the right nuggets from all of them and put them in a system. So the builders are the 2 people you just mentioned, Gino with EOS, Vern Harnish with Scaling Up, right? And these guys are great. I've met them, talked to them. They're amazing people, but they're builders, not architects. They would even say, Gino said, like, I didn't create this, I compiled it, right? So which is great. So at ConnectStrat, we've done the same thing. We're builders. We have some great things. We're pulling from amazing sources, and we're building a set of tools and concepts that allow our clients to put the ConnectStrat operating system into their business and do great things. How we differentiate, because I was a former EOS implementer. You said it at the beginning. Me and my co-founders were all EOS implementers, but we were very much just teaching a very restricted system and then facilitating meetings. It was extraordinarily rigid. You cannot waver. You cannot use specific words. There's no coaching. There's no consulting. There's like, here's the system. I teach it. I come facilitate a meeting according to this agenda. Goodbye. See you in a quarter. And that is just my whole every part of my entrepreneurial fiber was like, it was amazing what was built because it's extraordinary. I love what Gino did. It's extraordinary. And anybody who does it well, what you do is you execute well. He's taught you how to execute. Like if you do this, you will execute better. But we have 4 pillars at ConnectStrat. We talk about impact. I want to know how the owner and the leaders are impacting their own lives and their community. That's just not part of that system, right? Or let's really dig into vision, not just vision from like a democratic approach across the leadership team, but what does the owner see as the vision, and how do we begin to, and then strategy, which is literally a word that I don't think exists in the EOS language. There's a lot of other systems and things that lend strategy. So we wanted to be more holistic and think across what's the life and the vision and the strategy. And then our execution, our 4th pillar, looks, we use different words, but it looks quite similar to EOS because it's an amazing system, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I've actually run it, that playbook, and I do think it's very effective for the purpose that you meant, which is execution, right? I think many people, especially, when you're still trying to figure out like what's the recipe to scale my business, like that, having someone who can walk side by side with you, actually coach you versus install an operating system, is a big difference. Tell me who your typical client is. Like what is that? Who's the person that needs you the most?
Yeah. So our typical client, we're focused on the IT services space. We're not absolutely exclusive in that space, but our typical client is in the IT services space. We'll step out of we will work with folks who are in the technology space, but ultimately these days that's nearly everybody. So, but we do specialize in IT services, software, tech, kind of, because we speak that language. Not that it's required to speak the language, but we can offer incremental value to people when we walk in, being able to understand the language. They tend to be between a few million to 20 million in revenue. So kind of that size where where they have a solid revenue base, but they lack operational maturity and need to get consistency and maturity through the organization, which starts with the leadership team. So principally who we end up working with when we do that one-on-one, we have different coaching programs, but our principal program and all of the coaching I do and my co-founders do, because we have other coaches who deliver other elements. But what myself and my co-founders do is really both implementing that system, but also spending a lot of time with the owner and their second in command. Mm-hmm. So we want to know that the owner, as long as they're in the business, they're out of the business owner, then it's going to be whoever's the top within that business and their number two, and then facilitating not just quarterly meetings, but other meetings with the leadership team. So we're really focused on making sure that the people at the top are getting this right. They understand accountability, they understand culture, they're trusting Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions is like such a core underpinning of what we need to do with the leadership team. And when we get that right, then it bleeds down. So that we want them to be able to get their people doing what we've done with them. So I would say that we really focus on that owner and top of the pyramid.
Yeah, it's funny. Like previously I've worked with, operating systems, and they really sort of facilitate meetings with leadership teams, right? Yeah. But I love that when I ask you, who's your core client, you said businesses that look like this, but really we're supporting and coaching, which would imply that there's someone that you're working with there, right? Yeah. Why do you add in the number 2? I mean, I can assume I know the answer, but I'd love to understand, like, why not just the person at the top?
Ultimately, we internally have the belief there's a couple reasons. Reason one is business continuity. It is so important that we are creating a lifestyle and opportunity and legacy for the owner that they can step away for a couple weeks or a summer, or they can have an illness or something bad happen to them personally and have faith and understanding that there's someone who's got their back and has their absolute trust and confidence to be there when they can't or don't want to be there, right? Like we're so focused on, I don't want the owner to work for the business as an employee. I want the business to work for the owner as an asset. And part of that means absolute reliance and trust on who that person is, who truly can take the reins when they're not there. Because the weight and pressure of an entrepreneur, you and I both know, and I get to a business of 30 or 40 people, and I don't feel like anybody there truly has it when I leave for a week. Like I can trust and go and take then all I am spending my time doing is being weighted by that business. So our second in command idea, our 2 ICs is what we call them. The 2 ICs, and usually there's a person there who's naturally that when you dig deep, and they just haven't been given the autonomy and authority to act in that role. So if we can coach both of them and give them a voice outside of each other, amazing things happen really quickly. You start greasing the skids for movement in that organization in a completely different way. Then you go back to that Lencioni 5 dysfunctions, trust, accountability, conflict, all of those things start to happen. And it's powerful.
It's funny. I guess I never really thought about it, but I appreciate what you said. And under the best circumstances, that's exciting. But if you look at the alternative, I actually know someone who was trapped in another state for over a month because of a medical emergency, and the business that they run had to survive without. And turns out that their team was so well trained in the organization that they actually elevated the business in their absence, versus the opposite, which is probably what would happen with most entrepreneurs, because so much of it depends on them. So I think that's
got to enable. Yeah, that's amazing. That's an amazing, and it happens, right? So yeah, I would say a big part of it is risk mitigation. Just making sure you have redundancy and business continuity throughout the organization, human business continuity. Yeah. And then the other part is just it's really giving the owner the confidence that they can have a life. Yeah, because we work with a lot of owners that struggle in relationships, that struggle in their, like they live, breathe, bleed their business. Not all of them. Some of them are great at balance, but some of them struggle.
Yeah.
And we want to give them the confidence to be able to change that for themselves.
Yeah. I love it. The business, instead of being employed by the business is an asset. I mean, I think that we all start businesses with that intention, but so many get enslaved over time, right? It's just
100%.
Just happens. So I'm wondering though, I mean, you obviously are talking to a lot of business owners. I'm curious if there's maybe, I don't know, introspective moments you can provide some of our listeners in that, when you talk to these business owners, are there some like really common places you see entrepreneurs fall down, maybe places where they sort of more often than not make mistakes or underinvest or overinvest? I mean, have you seen anything like that?
That's all I see. We see it all the time. We're trying. This is literally why we exist, right? Is for them to bounce ideas and for us to. I can't dictate, but I can influence, right? So this is where I get passionate, right? So I love that question. Thank you. Yes, there is a point where an owner has to understand what it looks like to hand accountability to somebody and then trust them to have ownership and not undermine and conflict with what they're doing. Because ultimately, the easiest way to stifle the growth of a leader is to micromanage and distrust and undermine, right? And entrepreneurs, true entrepreneurs, not all of them, but the vast majority tend to be control people and really, really struggle to trust enough to relinquish control. So where I see people struggling to scale and find balance and do things that will grow their business successfully is they're not leveraging their leaders or trusting leaders. And it may be a part sometimes to follow leaders. It's a part-time entrepreneur, but when we can get absolute ownership and trust across elements of the leadership team, oh my God, every business can grow. If you get that working and the relief, like, okay, I'll step back and say I think of three functions of a business: get business, do business, get paid. You've got this three-legged stool, right? Every for-profit business has these three functions. Sales and marketing might be one or two leaders. Operations might be a few. Finance, HR. You've got this three-legged stool. And most entrepreneurs at some point, they're doing all of that, all those functions across their entire team. But the day that it's like, wow, marketing's a well-oiled machine. We're getting predictable leads all the time. I don't have to think about it anymore. I have a leader there. It just makes it happen. It's one thing off their plate. If you can eventually get to the point where those things are off their plate, look, and they can take a week and not have to think about it, it changes their entire lives. And that I'm seeing it happen, and it's just powerful. I love that.
It's funny. I was thinking about me as a younger business owner. The things that I think I did really well early on that helped catalyze, really catapult the business, I should say, was, hard driving, willing to solve all problems, take charge, lead and own everything. But at some point, the business matures to a place where that thing that made us successful in the early years is actually a thing that holds us back in the later stages of the business. And you have to sort of unlearn those. And I've hired many coaches. I'm a slow learner, so it took many coaches to do that. So hopefully you can help people shorten that learning curve.
Yeah, what got you here won't get you there, right? So I think that this is, we talked a little bit about the culture guide, which is there's two things I lean into. I just had a conversation this morning with a client, exactly the same thing. There's two things that I get extremely excited about, and I'll take every client back to their culture guide and their accountability chart. Like they're like how, and to that point, you're kind of, it's switching. We already talked about culture, but I switched towards that accountability chart. It's like, okay, great. Don't kid yourself. You own every role in leadership. You are the leadership team. Mm-hmm. You might have 5 people you're calling managers and having your leadership team meeting, but they're not, you're literally owning those roles. So let's get really honest about that. Yeah. And now let's talk how one by one you can trust somebody or put somebody in a role where you honestly don't have to spend the predominance of your time thinking about that role. And that's a process. So we've helped teams that, slowly grow that team. Maybe they have revenue requirements. They have to get to certain profitability before they can hire, but it's like, hey, let's prioritize making this work. And it's not going to be by hiring low-level workers that just increase your management load. At some point, somebody has to do that work. So let's get really, really clear about how we make this thing happen. Yeah. So I love that question, and that's where I get passionate.
Yeah. And I love the discipline to keep bringing them back to those simple tools that remind them, where their place is in the business and how to empower others. Jamison, I know we're getting close to the end here. Just a couple of questions for you as we sort of wrap up here. One, I'm just curious about how you give back. I mean, you spend a lot of time obviously building businesses. You've got the coaching business, but what do you do from a community standpoint to give back?
I think from a community standpoint, I'm very invested in EO. That's been actually a place where I feel like I give back. I love working with peers. I think that I do the same pretty strongly in my vertical of the MSP IT community. So I tend to travel and speak at a lot of engagements, go on web. I try to disseminate this kind of information. Somebody doesn't have to hire me to get nuggets out of a conversation, right? So I'm not really a cover to be private, I'll only share it if you pay me kind of guy. I mean, maybe somebody takes away that whole culture guide concept today and goes back and looks it up and figures out how to build something like that on their own, right? I mean, great, powerful. I know where my passion lies around this stuff, and I'll scream it from the rooftops. So I think that's how I give back.
Awesome. And then finally, just curious, I've found that most entrepreneurs, business leaders are avid learners. What are you trying to learn right now? How are you working on you?
Right now, I'm working on me. So it's interesting because working on me, I'm always working on me. I can get really personal on that one real quick. But I'm going to talk a little bit more in terms of the kind of the professional side of what I'm trying to learn and work on. It's really intriguing for me. As an entrepreneur, we're always trying to solve a problem and figure out how to do something. Right now, we're partway there, but making a coaching organization scalable to speak to more people is a challenge because an individual is paid, all of us are paid exactly the same in hours per day. And I like to figure out how do we get our message and our teachings out to more people in a more scalable fashion. We have some incredible coaches that do one-on-one executive training or other management leadership training. It's super powerful to find other coaches to do that and share our message. And then we're trying to figure out how to do it through groups and other things. So there's a lot of learning and trial and error in that scalability, which I think a lot of firms like ours have really struggled with. So we're figuring that out. And it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. Well, maybe that'll be another episode of the podcast later down the road. All right. Well, we've been listening to Jamison West, the founder of ConnectStrat and the author of The Emotional Side of Selling a Small Business. Jamison, if people want to learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they find you?
Well, two places. JamisonWest.com is an easy one. But from a coaching perspective, if you want to have a conversation with us on that side, ConnectStrat, ConnectStrat.com is a great place to find us as well.
Awesome. And we'll put that in the show notes. Thanks again for being on today.
All right. Absolutely. Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to the Future is Borderless podcast with David Nilssen. Be sure to click subscribe to future episodes so you can hear from more top entrepreneurs and thought leaders. And we'll see you again next time.